If you're looking for a super affordable intake for that 2015 through 2017 GT that will just so happen to pack a whole bunch of flash, well, my friend, you have found it. The SR Performance Polished Cold Air here will be the most affordable in the category, and by a pretty hefty margin, mind you, and will be a direct bolt-on, no tune required option that can be had right around 150 bucks. Now, since most, if not all, aftermarket intakes bolt on without modification, including this one, expect a relatively simple 1 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter here, and about an hour or so to get everything knocked out. But let's just cut right to the chase and call this thing what it is, and that is a budget-friendly or entry-level intake. It's not going to have some of the more elaborate features, if you will, such as a fancy sealed airbox, or maybe a roto-molded plastic tube with brands stamped all over it. Instead, this is going to be as bare bones as it gets. However, it is one of only 2 intakes in the category currently that will be available with a brightly polished finish, the other being the K&N Series 69, which, by the way, is more than double the price of the SR intake that we have here. So again, if you want that flash but you don't need a bunch of big brand names stamped all over it, this is no doubt going to be a solid choice. So what else are you going to be receiving outside of your polished aluminum intake tube? Well, for one, you are going to be looking at a reusable high-flow oiled filter here, along with all of your couplers, the hardware, and of course your heat shield needed to get everything in place. I do want to point out that the heat shield will help in blocking out some of that hot engine bay air from entering your filter, but ultimately, guys, if you want a true cold air intake, you're going to have to stick with some sort of sealed enclosure, as it's really going to be the only way to achieve that feature. So in addition to your components, we also know that this thing can be used without the use of a custom tune. However, at this time, it has not been CARB certified. What about some of the benefits? Well, outside of your aesthetics from the polished finish, for those that are into that, you can also look forward to things like a little bit more throttle response, a big time increase in noise coming from under the hood of your S550 GT, and last but not least, a little bump in power, guys. Nothing too crazy here. We're talking mid to high single digits in regards to both horsepower and torque when used without a custom tune. But now comes the time in the video where we show you how to get everything installed. So as promised, here is that detailed walkthrough along with a quick tool breakdown.
Tools used for this installation: push pin removal tool, flathead screwdriver, extension, 10mm socket, 8mm socket, 7mm socket, 3/8 drive, side cutters or diagonal cutters, a screwdriver with a T15 bit and a Phillips head bit, optional as an impact. Today I'm going to show you how to install the SR Performance Cold Air Intake for your 15 through 17 S550 Mustang. Let's get started. So our first step, of course, is to pop the hood. All right, the next step is to remove our engine cover to gain access to the front of our throttle body. Now there's 4 little pressure fittings we just need to lift up in the top and in the back, and then it should slide right out, not having to remove this strut tower brace. All right, first we're gonna work on removing our vacuum lines and the sound tube lines. You're gonna have to remove 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Now for the sound tube, I have an 8mm socket for this hose clamp. Just gonna loosen that up, pull it away from the airbox. Then for our vacuum lines, there's a little clip you just have to push down and remove. Same thing for this vacuum line right here. That's for your PCV, that goes into your valve cover. I'm gonna switch my sockets up to a 7mm. Attack our hose clamp over here. All right, you don't have to remove it because it will be locked in there. Next, we're gonna disconnect our mass airflow sensor right here. There's a little red tab on the bottom side of it. Move that backwards, and then that will slide right out. All right, now I'm gonna take a 10mm and take the bolt out of our airbox. All right, now we have to make room for our airbox to come out. You'll see a little attachment for our mass airflow sensor. I'm using a push pin removal tool to get behind that right there and just pry it out. You can use a flathead screwdriver. We're just trying to get this out of the way. Set up to the side there. Now we're gonna pull the boot from the throttle body, just like that. Make sure all our lines are disconnected, mass airflow is out of the way, and this should just pop right out. All All right, one last step before we can work on our new cold air intakes. We have to remove these 8 push pins holding this little radiator cover in place. So I'm using my push pin removal tool again. You can use a flathead, but I highly recommend one of these tools. All right, so now that you have your parts for your new SR Performance Cold Air Intake on the table, we're gonna take our weather stripping, and we're going to put it around the edge of the top here. Should be able to make that corner no problem. And then we're gonna go right to this grommet right here and then cut off the extra. And I just have a pair of diagonal cutters or side cutters or however you wanna call them. Sometimes there's a little piece after that metal. I'm just gonna make sure it's seated all the way on there. All right, now we're gonna take our plastic ring, insert our air filter into the large portion of it. All right, we're gonna tighten that down. I'm just using a flathead for this hose clamp here. All right, and then this is gonna go through here. But we'll wait till we get on the car so we can put our boot on there as well. There's a few things we gotta do to this still. There's a rubber grommet that we have to slip through this hole right here. I'm going to take my weather stripping and get that out of the way. Put this in its new hole right there. Perfect. All right, our next step is to transfer our mass airflow sensor from our old air box to our new tube here. So I have a T15 Torx head here on a screwdriver. I'm just gonna loosen this up. We are not going to be reusing that hardware, so we're going to put it right back into its place. Be careful with this mass airflow sensor. You will see that the sensor is oriented towards the filter housing, so we're going to do the same thing. All right, now there should be a little gasket, and there is right there on the mass airflow sensor. So we're gonna slip that into place. Start our screws. All right, so I have this really thin piece of weather stripping. This actually goes where the intake tube and the air filter go. So I'm gonna put that in place now. This is kind of tricky, so just be patient. You can even use a little bit of glue to keep it in place. Another thing we're gonna do is we're gonna attach our boot to our air filter. That's just gonna slide on there. Use one of our supplied hose clamps, slip that down, and tighten that up. All right, now with that tight, we're gonna put another hose clamp on it, and you'll see why I'm doing that. Actually, we're gonna put it through first and then put our hose clamp on. And then we're gonna bring our intake tube into place. Mass airflow sensor facing towards you and the front of the car. Slip that intake tube in there. Nice and evenly. Now I'm gonna tighten this up. Make sure my clamp is where I want it. All right, now we're ready to bring this into the car. All right, we have one more step to prepping our engine bay for our new cold air intake. We have to remove these two 10mm bolts holding this upper radiator bracket in place. So since you have your lower and your other radiator bracket in place, when you remove this, you may notice a little bit of flex from your radiator. Don't worry about that. We're gonna be putting that right back into place. All right, so now I'm gonna bring our new air box and air filter into place. And you'll notice this tab here, we're gonna slip that over our radiator hoop there. We're gonna make sure our intake is pretty much right there. All right, so we're gonna put our bolt back into our fender. I'm gonna move, you can bend this air box ever so slightly. Bend that into place. Tighten that up. Then we're gonna move back to the radiator bracket we just took off. We're gonna slip this bracket back on and put our bolts back in. All right, now we're gonna take our boot for the throttle body and our air intake tube. We're gonna insert this nipple. This is gonna be for our vacuum lines. I'm gonna push it down until that seat's right there. Now you want this facing towards the passenger side. Let's put our hose clamp on first, and then slip this guy on. Then we're gonna slide this onto our throttle body with another hose clamp. Make sure that it's on all the way around that throttle body. All right, now we're gonna tighten down these hose clamps. And now we can work on our vacuum lines. Now the next step is gonna require you to cut this rubber hose for our vacuum tee. I'm gonna cut it right about here, and I'm just using a really sharp knife. And just like that, that way we can get our tee in there with our hose clamp, then hose clamp this end to the intake tube. Now you are gonna have an extra vacuum port. We are gonna cap that off as well. All right, now we're gonna put our hose clamps on our vacuum tee. Slide that on right there, tighten that down. All right, now this is ready to be installed on our intake right there, but be sure to put your other hose clamp on there. We're gonna slide that on right there. We're gonna tighten that down as well. All right, let's make our vacuum connections. This is the PCV. It's gonna go right there. This one's another vacuum line. That is gonna go right here. Now this vacuum line will go onto the intake elbow here. Just like that. All right, now we're gonna put our sound tube back into place. This is gonna go underneath the PCV here. And make this connection here. That sound tube will slip right onto there. We'll tighten that down with our 7mm. All right, this is the vacuum cap for the top there. And then we're going to replug in our mass airflow sensor. And then get our grill cover back into place. Radiator cover back into place here. And our push pin. All right, we're gonna place our engine cover back on. This will just slide back into place. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap up my install of this SR Performance cold air intake. And for all things Mustang, keep it here at AmericanMuscle.com.